Good afternoon, and welcome to our third presentation of the Envisioning Our Future for Children series. I'm Peter Margolis, I'll be the moderator today, and before we start, just a few reminders. This webinar will be recorded and it'll be archived for online viewing in the future. To claim CME credit, you must complete an evaluation that will be sent via email at the conclusion of the presentation. If you have any questions related to the session, please enter them in the Q&A section of the room, and you can access that at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can, but please be aware that we might not get to all of them. And if you have technical difficulties, you can use the Q&A feature to contact the administrator. Cincinnati Children's is a unique organization. We're privileged to be able to think about what we can do together to achieve a transformative impact on child health. Few organizations are so fortunate, and there's no one better to help us consider how we might approach this challenge than Dr. Donald Berwick. For those who are less familiar with him, let me describe a little bit of Dr. Berwick's background briefly. Don is one of the nation's leading authorities on healthcare quality and improvement. Trained as a pediatrician, Dr. Berwick was president and CEO of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, an organization that he co-founded and led for 19 years, and where he's currently president emeritus and senior fellow. He served as a professor at Harvard Medical School and in the Harvard School of Public Health, and he's held a wide range of important national and international leadership positions in addition to his role at the IHI. You can read about them in his bio. He was appointed by President Obama as administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. He was vice chair of the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. He was the first independent member of the Board of Trustees of the American Hospital Association. And he was chair of the National Advisory Council for the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. He's a member of the American Philosophical Society, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the National Academy of Medicine. And he's been recognized many times with awards for contributions to healthcare, including being appointed Honorary Knight Commander of the British Empire by Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Our Cincinnati Children's relationship with Dr. Berwick goes back nearly 20 years to when Don began to work with us as part of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Pursuing Perfection project. Pursuing Perfection was an 8-year demonstration project that took place between 2001 and 2008 with the goal of learning if and how healthcare organizations could make dramatic improvements in performance across the organization, resulting in considerably more efficient and effective healthcare systems. Cincinnati Children's was one of 13 healthcare organizations from the US and Europe that designed, tested, and implemented changes in strategy, structure, and key processes supported by IHI faculty and with frequent contact along with each other in a collaborative learning model. Our local initiative was led by Uma Kodagal, along with many others at Cincinnati Children's who are no doubt listening today. And it was during that time that Don, Tom Nolan, Lloyd Provost, and others helped us launch on a journey that continues today. I've been incredibly fortunate, along with many, many others, to count Don as a key inspiration in my career. Changing systems is hard work, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for the times I've been able to learn from and be inspired by Dr. Berwick. He's taught me and many others about the leadership of system change, how it requires clarity of purpose, persistence, motivation, optimism, and courage. He's clear-eyed, unafraid to tell the truth, and unique in his ability to inspire the trust, fortitude, and commitment required to tackle unforgiving problems. As we emerge from the COVID pandemic, we're at a watershed moment in our country. Dr. Berwick's talk, entitled The Moral Determinants of Health, will challenge us to think today about how we might rise to this moment. Don, please go ahead, unmute, and share your screen.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I just, first of all, it's a delight to spend time with you. Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center has been a very important part of my life professionally and personally now for the more than decades since Pursuing Perfection. And I've learned so much from this organization. It's an astounding leader in American medicine. Often I'm asked for benchmark organizations in the US, places to really go to and understand improvement in action. And Cincinnati is the first place I mentioned. It's extraordinary, and it's a privilege to get to spend time with you. You've asked me to discuss what I regard personally as a relatively challenging matter, which I've come to call the moral determinants of health. I'll explain that. We only have half an hour to go through these slides, and I look forward to conversation. But let me proceed apace here. Our interactions, Cincinnati and mine, have revolved for almost 2 decades now around the improvement of healthcare, quality improvement, which in the earlier part of this century had a pretty distinct definition. It was working on the 6 aims for improvement that were outlined in the Crossing the Quality Chasm report. The Pursuing Perfection project was absolutely centered on and launched by Crossing the Quality Chasm, in which all of those 13 organizations that Peter mentioned, including Cincinnati, were asked to work toward perfection on safety, not harming people, effectiveness, aligning care with science reliably, patient-centeredness, shifting power to patients, timeliness, reduction of delays, of unwarranted delays, efficiency, cost reduction through waste reduction, and equity, closing racial and socioeconomic gaps in care. This was the charter and the mission of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and all of us, including Cincinnati, working on improvement of care in the beginning part of this century. This was actually enhanced in 2004 and 2005 by Tom Nolan and John Whittington, 2 IHI faculty members, who said that the Institute of Medicine Crossing the Quality Chasm dimensions actually were only part of the agenda for modern health and healthcare improvement. They said that's about the experience of care. Those dimensions of care had to do with people who got into the healthcare system one way or another, but healthcare doesn't generate health. It is the repair shop for the actual generators of health. And Whittington and Nolan challenged us all to add a second component to the package of aims, which they called improving the health of populations, improving the health of the care of individuals, the 6 aims, and improving the health of populations. And they added the third part of the triple aim, reduction of per capita cost. And so if you had stopped me in, say, 2006 or 2007 and said, what are you trying to get done? I would have used this slide. I would have said, we're trying to work on experience of care, health of populations, and lower per capita cost. Cincinnati was right there. Uma Kodagal and her amazing team and colleagues and the organization as a whole began to invest deeply in the health of children in the population of Cincinnati, and has always been attentive to the cost issues. COVID came along, and that has changed the game somewhat. We have a new set of options and opportunities in the COVID pandemic for working on all of the above. COVID has led to a speed of change, a speed of adaptation of knowledge that I've just never seen before. I'm on the Journal Oversight Committee for JAMA, which now turns around papers in days that would have taken weeks or months. I'm on the Standing Committee on Emerging Infections and 21st Century Threats in the National Academy of Medicine, which produced 11 reports in a single month last March, a year ago March, in an organization that usually takes a year to produce a single report. We're much more focused now on standardization, learning to take care of COVID patients and seeking the best around the world and trying to adapt it in our own locations. Virtual care has obviously taken off, threatening our prior understandings of the needs for visits, and changing massively in a short, I knew a health center in Boston that went from 5% to 95% virtual visits in a week. Protecting the workforce has become a big issue and expanded our whole notion of what the workforce is. Preparedness itself would be topic for a whole other lecture. We were not prepared as a nation, and we have to discover why and get ready for the next 21st century threat from a far better standpoint than we were for this one. And of course, inequity, which I'm actually going to be talking about a lot in the next few minutes. So this is the context in which our work on improvement is playing out day by day. Equity, of course, has become probably the major theme in healthcare in some ways, at least in the world I work in. I show this slide to make the point that issues of equity in health and healthcare, which really were contemplated in the triple aim in the population health arena, are not just out there, they're inside healthcare as well. We have the same problems of injustice and exclusion and racism in healthcare that the rest of the American society does. This report struck me a year ago, May, more than 800,000 healthcare workers and almost 1.1 million of their children live in poverty across the United States. That is, they get paid in healthcare less than the U.S. poverty line, which itself is a very rather stingy definition of poverty. Of the 18.5 million people employed in healthcare, 10% of them, even though they're employed in healthcare, 1.7 million earn so little that they have to rely on Medicaid for their health insurance. And 1.4 million healthcare workers, as of a year ago, May, had no health insurance at all. We're going to be talking about equity and justice and determinants of health in the remainder of my time with you. I want to make the point this applies within healthcare itself. Now, to set the stage for my conversation with Peter and for my kind of recommendations to Cincinnati, I'm relying on the guidance of this masterful epidemiologist, a friend and international hero in the field of epidemiology, Sir Michael Marmot. Marmot, who's an epidemiologist in the UK and a worldwide figure on as a student of equities in health, wrote this book in 2015, The Health Gap, which I have recommended in prior speeches and I recommend again today. I think it should be mandatory reading in healthcare because it's going to give a lot of texture to the question, what have we missed and what do we have to do to fix it? What Marmot did as a 40-year student of variations in health status is take all that literature, all that research, and sort of digest it into an easily usable form in a single volume, the 2015 book. I would recommend all of you listening to me that you read this book. And what the book does is take the rather vague idea of social determinants of health, that population health piece of the triple aim, and it does redacts it. It gets it into a digestible form in 5 categories of the things that make us healthy or ill. Remember, healthcare is a repair shop, and we need it. We need it to be as superb as it could possibly be. That repair shop should work perfectly every day according to the dictates of the National Academy of Medicine's 6 aims for improvement. But it doesn't cause illness except for patient safety issues, and it doesn't cause health. The causes of health lie in the social shapers of health. And Marmot says, the literature says there are sort of 5 of them. And here are the 5 categories. Early childhood experiences. What happens to kids early in their lives, as you in Cincinnati know, has a tremendous effect, not just on the well-being of kids, but on the health and well-being of adults. I'll show you that in a minute. The second is education. The robustness, equity, and overall reliable, high quality of education systems, nation by nation, seem to determine strongly health and well-being in the nation as a whole. Conditions of work, including generous minimum wages, guarantees, and also guarantees in the workplace around safety and effectiveness at work and a sense of meaning at work. These are very strongly connected to the health and well-being of societies. The fourth category is the way societies deal with the needs of elders, especially issues around loneliness and continuing productivity in society. And the fifth category that Marmot talks about is community resilience. It's actually a miscellaneous category in Marmot's book. It's a bunch of characteristics of communities like food security, housing security, transportation, environmental threats, recreational opportunities, criminal justice, violence, responses to violence, and restorative justice. These are community infrastructures that relate to health and well-being. When you say social determinants of health from now on, when you're talking about the things that make us ill or healthy, these 5 are what Marmot says are what you should mean according to the literature. I'll point out the United States does not score well on this. If you want to know why we are, despite spending nearly 30 or 40% more than the next most expensive country on the repair shop, healthcare, why we are still far from the healthiest country. We're about 40th, I think, in life expectancy now in infant mortality. We were rated 93rd in the world in overall health and well-being in a United Nations study. We are lowest among the OECD countries in many, many indicators. If you want to know why, look at that list. It's because our investments in supports to early childhood, especially for marginalized populations and children confronted with poverty, are nowhere near the best in the world. Our education system, at its best, is as good as the best, but it's not the best for everyone. We don't have guaranteed high quality education in this country. Our workplace conditions are not defended at the level in many other Western democracies, and our minimum wage is very low compared to minimum wages in other countries. We don't have elder care policy in this country, not to keep elders engaged with society. And our community infrastructures, our public transportation, our recreational quality, our housing security, food security are not world-class. So the United States is not anywhere near the healthiest country on earth because of the shape of our investment or lack of investment at scale in these determinants. Marmot, who's a student of variation in health status, asks why? Why do countries, regions vary so much in their health and well-being in these social determinants? And that leads him to a sixth category in his book, which he calls fairness. It's a sense of solidarity, mutual responsibility, caring for people with disadvantage. Countries that have a kind of ethos of fairness and ethos of inclusiveness are healthier countries. And this is the causal path that Marmot speaks of. Inequities, he says, in power, money, and resources, unfairness, give rise to inequities in the conditions of daily life, social determinants of health, which in turn lead to inequities in health. And this causal pathway, which Marmot reads out of the literature on the epidemiology of health and well-being, is what leads me to the argument I'm about to make, which I call the moral determinants of health. The consequences of failure to invest in those determinants are massive. Here's a very striking graph published by Raj Chetty from Harvard in 2016, showing the relationship between household income on the horizontal axis and expected age of death for a 40-year-old. For people that reach age 40, what is their expected death length of life? Notice here, for example, for women, comparing the bottom 1% of household income to the top 1% of household income, there's a 10-year difference in life expectancy at age 40. For men, it's a 15-year difference at life expectancy at age 40. And these differences, 10, 15 years, these are the differences in overall life expectancy between high-income and low-income countries. If you want to see the dynamics at work, let's take a quick dive into the first of the listed social determinants that Marmot talks about, of particular relevance, of course, to us pediatricians. This is a wonderful volume produced last December by the Surgeon General of California, who decided to look at the conditions of kids in California and did it through the lens of adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress. These are, as you know, the adverse childhood experiences is the index of exposures of kids to severe stresses developed by an index developed by Kaiser Permanente and the CDC in the early part of the century. It's a simple count. It's the number of serious exposures to various forms of trauma and stress that kids are exposed to. This is the social determinant dynamic that results from that investigation. For kids with 4 or more adverse childhood experiences as young children, these are the odds ratios for the risks of leading causes of death in adulthood. For kids with 4 or more ACEs, twice the heart disease, 2.3 times the rate of cancers, 2.6 times the accident injury rate. Chronic lung disease, 3 times more common in adulthood for people who were exposed to 4 or more ACEs as kids. For mental health conditions and many other forms of chronic illness, the ratios approach or exceed double-digit odds ratios. This is the adverse childhood experiences, a social determinant playing out in adult health. I'm always, when I show this slide, I'm well aware that there's a problem with this slide, which is it's about a deficit view, a toxicity view of stresses in childhood, not an asset-based view. And I'm well aware of that literature too, but I wanted to show it to you to show you more vividly the pathways Marmot's talking about. Let's look at the US with respect to childhood stress. This is the Child Opportunity Index, the 2.0, the new version published in October 2020 by a multi-university consortium of investigators who maintain this index of census tracts in the U.S. Every single one of over 70,000 census tracts in the U.S. being scored with respect to what they call Childhood Opportunity Index. The index is it's a multivariate index. These are the components of it. It's quite capacious, including issues of education, issues of health and environment, and social and economic conditions of kids, leading to a scoring of every single census tract in the U.S. with respect to the conditions in which kids are finding themselves. Here are two hypothetical neighborhoods. I take this slide from Dr. David Williams, my colleague at Harvard, who compares neighborhood A to neighborhood B. Neighborhood A is a very low opportunity neighborhood according to the Child Opportunity Index. Neighborhood B is a high opportunity neighborhood. So by comparison, neighborhood A has a much higher poverty rate, much less opportunity for kids to be in early childhood education, less green space, less food security, and less housing security. If you rate, as these investigators do, the 70,000 census tracts of the U.S., and you ask about what conditions kids are finding themselves, this is the distribution of opportunity index from very low opportunity to very high opportunity for kids who are white or Asian and Pacific Islander. So you see, 6 to 8% of white and Asian Pacific Islander kids living in very low opportunity areas, whereas 40% are living in very high. Between high and very high opportunity, there's 70% of those kids, white and Asian Pacific Islander, are living in high opportunity neighborhoods. Same distribution, though, here for Latinx and African American kids who have the opposite distribution. You see, for very low opportunity neighborhoods, 30%, 32% of Hispanic, and 46%, almost half, African American kids are living in very low opportunity neighborhoods. Between low and very low, you're approaching 70% of African American kids being raised under conditions of considerable outside stress. This is a particularly dramatic view of this. This is one of the maps in the work of the collaborative that does this work. Here you're seeing all the census tracts in the Baltimore, Columbia, Towson metropolitan area being coded for their opportunity index. So the darker colors are high opportunity areas. The lighter colors are low opportunity areas. Here's where white kids live. Every little green dot here represents 20 children aged 0 to 17. And notice where they're living, largely in areas of high or very high opportunity, according to the index. And this is where African American kids live. When we talk about structural racism, this is it. This is partly what it looks like. If I were to show you the redlining map for the federal government mortgage loans back in the 1940s or 50s, it's the same map. It's this exact same distribution of opportunities to get mortgages, asymmetrically distributed between whites and African Americans. So one would say, if you follow the logic from Sir Michael Marmot's scientific review through the workings of childhood stress in young childhood to the conditions of older people, you would predict health outcomes. And indeed, you find them. So here is the Black to white infant mortality ratio differences in the US, more than double infant mortality rates for Black babies in 2015. For Native American Indians, double again. These are the consequences of the determinants we're talking about. And it plays out, as you know, it's played out most visibly right now in the COVID pandemic, where people of color are experiencing death rates in COVID for a year and a half now, more than double, and sometimes even much more than that compared to whites, even, by the way, adjusted for socioeconomic determinants like like income and household composition. One of the famous ways to display disparities of this type that Marmot talks about and others do is the so-called subway map. Here's a map of London. This is the subway system, the London Tube, some of it. And what's happened is at every tube stop on the London Tube is the expected life expectancy of people who live in that area. Here's West London and the Oxford Circus area where the numbers are in the 90s, life expectancy. Cross London to East London, much more socially disadvantaged area, lots more stress and poverty, and the numbers change fast. As you go across London, there's a 21-year difference in life expectancy between the wealthier and least wealthy areas of the country. As you of the city, as you travel across the city, you're looking at a loss of about 2.6 years of life for every mile you travel from Oxford Circus to Star Lane. The same is true in New York City. Here's the subway map for New York from Midtown Manhattan, 96th Street here, where the median income is about $180,000. The mostly white, very few of the kids on Medicaid. Here's the South Bronx, median income less than a third of Midtown Manhattan. Mostly people of color, and much more than half the kids born into Medicaid. And in that subway map, there's a 10-year life expectancy difference as you travel from Midtown Manhattan to the South Bronx. You're losing 2.3 years per mile traveled. The same subway maps you can draw in any city, I'm sure in Cincinnati, as well as in Chicago. It's 16 years between the Chicago Loop and West Chicago. In Flint, Michigan, it's 15 years from the wealthier to the poor areas of Flint. How big is this? 2.3 years for every mile traveled on the subway. Let me show you a little trick I use to look at how powerful these determinants of health are, these shapers of health. This is a systematic review of statin effect published in British Medical Journal back in 2015. Christensen and colleagues looked at all the literature on statins, which are largely regarded as a medical breakthrough, although they're actually more controversial than you might think. They found for primary prevention trials, as they reviewed the literature, death was postponed through primary prevention using statins between actually a negative effect, -5 days, and +19 days. 1 day of life added, according to the most favorable studies in primary prevention with one year on statin. 20 days of lifespan gained with 20 years on statins on average in primary prevention at the highest, the most optimistic research. 20 days of lifespan is what's lost on that D train from Midtown Manhattan to the South Bronx in 7 seconds on the D train. Crossing Glasgow, you lose 20 days of lifespan expectation and 43 feet on the bus in Glasgow. This is a little deceptive, of course, because this is not a ramp. It's like a cliff. You're not losing life expectancy every mile you travel. It depends on the locality, on the area you enter. But the point of this is to show how massive these effects of the determinants that Marmot talks about, including the super determinant of fairness, is compared to the repair shop. The repair shop is puny in its effects on lifespan and, in fact, quality of life at a population level, country by country. In our country, you see this play out as a matter of inequity in health. This is life expectancy at age 50 for men, depending on year of birth. Here's a 20-year period. These men were born in 1920. They're 101 years old now if they lived. These men were born in 1950. They're 71 years of age now if they lived. The life expectancy, if they reach age 50, has grown fast over that 30-year period for people in the middle and highest levels of income. But for men in the poorest, 10 and 20% of the population, little gain at all. And for women, a loss of life expectancy over that 30-year period because of the deterioration of the conditions that generate health and well-being, the social determinants of illness. This is a rather political slide. If you're filling out your rating forms for this session, you can now rate me down because I'm going to get into politics a bit, but I have to because that's where the data point us. When you look at the Marmot determinants, early childhood experiences, education systems and their strength, protections at work, elder policy, and community infrastructures, you are very, very largely looking at the activities of government. It is government that creates the school systems and the education system, the education overall. It's government that determines what the conditions of work are going to be as a matter of social guarantee, or that create elder policy or build our public transportation. And so there's a strong relationship between government investments, which Marmot believes is mediated by a sense of fairness, and the actual conditions of social determinants. In the US, we've gone backwards. Here's rising tax rates for people in the bottom 50% or middle 40% of our economy, and plummeting tax rates for people in the highest levels of income. So we have a regressive government financing policy in the country played out here over 50 years, in the sense of more being contributed by those with less and less being contributed by those with more. And of course, it's impossible to have this conversation without referencing racism. The heritage of 400 years since the arrival of slavery in this country is still very much with us. I needn't tell you, in Cincinnati. And almost all of the social determinants that we talked about earlier are actually mediated in part by race, the variations mediated by race, because in almost every one of the determinants, to be African-American, Latinx in this country, or Native American, predictably, you will have a harder hand dealt with you from the deck of cards around social determinants. And this leads me to my final slide. But the slide begins with a question. Okay, we know what creates health and well-being. It's not healthcare. Healthcare is a repair shop. God bless it. We need it. We should keep it. But if we want to be healthy and well as a society, thriving as a society, we're not going to find that in healthcare. It's going to be found in other conditions in society. We know what those are scientifically. I just showed them to you. And yet, if you look at the behaviors of the United States with respect to the determinants of health, they have not favored health. They favored health care, of course. 18% of our gross domestic product now, but we have not invested systematically as a nation in the production of health and well-being. Why not? That's the question. And I don't know the answer. I can riff on it. I think it has to do with incumbent stakeholders, because people in healthcare today make a lot of money at delivering their repair shop, and they don't want to give that up. It could have to do with politics and the question of fairness and solidarity, whether we are a country that generally believes that we will fundamentally help each other and use government as a tool to do that, or not, whether we believe that people earn their status in life by the way they behave, or whether those status in life is largely created by conditions that they were dealt. I don't know, but I do know what we're doing, which is not buying health in the United States, compared to other OECD countries, which put about $2 in social services into their government work compared to every dollar in healthcare. We're the opposite. We have 90 cents on social supports for every dollar in healthcare. How could we change that investment? What would it take to move investment in the United States into the determinants of health? I must say some of that would have to come from healthcare. With 18% of the GDP, we can't be bystanders. Healthcare can't continue to say, give us more at the expense of of investment in social determinants, which is exactly what happens today. I ran for governor of Massachusetts back in 2013 and 2014. And I looked at the state budget, and I could see every single line item in our state budget down by 15, 20, 25%. Early childhood supports, public education supports for public higher education, recreational opportunities, the transportation system over a 14-year period by the nonpartisan Center for Health Policy, down 15, 20, 25, 30%, healthcare up 73%. So healthcare is confiscatory. It's taking the money. What would reverse that? My answer is not satisfactory. It would be checking our moral compass. If we said our caring for each other, our desire to be healthy, would lead us to invest in the determinants of health, what would that moral compass point to? It would point to at least these 7 things. We would declare that. We would declare that fairness and equity as human rights characterize our country. Now, we have stood aside. The United States has not signed the UN Convention on Rights of Children. We've never signed the UN Convention on Rights of Women or rights of migrants and their families. We would declare healthcare unequivocally a human right. We still leave 30 million people out. That would be over in a morally directed pursuit of health and well-being. We would restore our leadership to climate change. Climate change is going to be a massive attack on health and well-being in our entire planet, including in the United States, and it will inequitably hurt people who are most vulnerable. We'll achieve a reform of a criminal justice system in our country that's completely broken. 2.3 million people in prison. 70% have mental health or substance misuse issues. 7-to-1 ratio of African American to white. 5-to-1 ratio of Latino to white incarceration rates. This system is a health destroyer in our country, and it doesn't have to be that way. We work on compassionate immigration reform and have policies that do not lead to violence and illness and injury at our southern border. We would end hunger and homelessness in this country. 70 million hungry people, 40 million hungry people in our country. 700,000 by official records, chronically homeless, although I think that's a vast undercount. There's no reason for a wealthy country to have food insecurity or housing insecurity. And we would, I think, restore order to the governmental agencies and supports that pursue health and well-being as their mission. And I think on that pathway is voter security. I think we'll be better as a real democracy instead of one that is injuring democratic access to the processes of government. What does this have to do with you? Well, you've asked me to think about Cincinnati and its future. You can't occupy 18% of the gross domestic product, employ 20 million people, absorb $4 trillion a year, and not help solve these problems. The challenge for Cincinnati, for all of us in healthcare, is to figure out how to take the science of health production and move it into the daily activities of the organizations that we claim are health organizations in the first place. That's not easy, and I'm sure Peter will have lots of conversation about what that actually would mean on the ground. Thanks for the chance to share the thoughts.
Thank you, Don. Thank you very much. And I wonder if there are questions that we can take from the audience. And while I'm waiting for those to come up, could you go a little bit deeper into what you think a place like Cincinnati Children's, with the kinds of resources and the kinds of capabilities that we have and the kinds of trajectory that we've been on, might start to do that would be a beacon for not only improved care here, but also be a beacon for others?
I believe that it behooves healthcare to select some of the social determinants that I just talked about. 3 I would pick, for example, would be hunger, homelessness, houselessness, and criminal justice, for example, and to become an active, not a passive, but an active participant in the elimination of these problems in the locality, in the local community. I don't know exactly how to do that. I'm just saying that you only do what you intend to do. And I think I would declare as a major academic medical center that we are going to be leaders in revolutionizing the criminal justice system in the Cincinnati area till it becomes a global model of restorative justice. I think that I would work hard with metrics and quality improvement skills that you have to end homelessness and food insecurity in Cincinnati. On the other side of the coin is a very, very tough ask, and I want us to stay friends as we've been for 20 years. But you have to stop asking for more money. It has to end. Healthcare has confiscated much more than it needs, and that includes Cincinnati. And there has to be one component of this has to be a transfer of resources from the repair shop to the causal system, and that's not going to happen so long as every lobbyist in healthcare is on every Capitol Hill in the country arguing for higher pay and more money because they do such good work. I know you do good work. Turn around, as Cincinnati has been doing in the time I've known it, and look for the resources internally by stopping waste and start to give back money to these other very important uses. That's some of it. At the micro level, for every patient you see, as you know, Peter, we're focusing on what matters to them, and when it has to do with a social determinant, that's our problem too.
Thanks, Todd. There are now a series of questions. In quality improvement, we always like to learn from variations. So can you talk a little bit about where there are some success stories in healthcare institutions that are really addressing these kinds of issues that we should be learning from?
Yes, I'd say in the United States, no one's really got this yet, but I personally believe that those healthcare systems that are operating under global budgets are emerging as more likely to authentically engage through resource allocation, putting their money where their mouth is on dealing with some of these true causes. Kaiser Permanente is to me in the lead, especially in the California regions, and especially in Northern California, where there's a global budget and there's a governance and a systematic and a senior architecture that says we're going to take this money and put it over here instead of over there. So I think organizations with global budgets where I would look. Now, obviously, you're more likely to find that outside the U.S. than inside it, and you do. So the benchmark country for me right now in investing in social determinants, at least I don't know them all. I mean, obviously, I don't travel everywhere, but I'd say Sweden is worth the look. And I think your colleagues, Peter, you know them well, in Sweden are able to think at the regional level about resource allocation in an extremely rational way with respect to where determinants of health, where health lies. So I think for a place of the importance, the gravitas of a Cincinnati, you've got to have global brains. You've got to be thinking about models that are not American and importing them into Cincinnati. And I think you'll get a lot more mileage there than you will for a lot of what's going on in the U.S.
Don, there are several questions related to financing and other stakeholders in the healthcare world. One question is, you would think that even those that finance healthcare might be compelled here, and others ask, what about industry? How might we attract their involvement in this kind of work? Or is that
it's very hard. Okay, first let's take insurers. Insurers are transactors right now. Mostly, they move money from one place to another, and they take their share of that, which does not, in general, add value. It's simply a transaction cost. And we don't see insurers being authentically activist in actually moving resources from one place, the repair shop, to the health production. They're trapped. I mean, they have to play the game the way the game is played today, which is why I favor global budgets, because I think that would change the opportunities. The most feasible global budgeter, by the way, is the government. That's why running Medicare is such a delight. The highlight of my career was getting to run Medicare, and I could see the potential of Medicare potentially leading in this direction over time with a much more tractable Congress than we have then or now. For others in the industry, including, I would say, hospitals, but definitely pharmaceuticals and manufacturers, they've got to stop confiscatory pricing. When the rule for pricing is you just get everything you possibly can, and engage in the gaming that a lot of healthcare organizations do around coding, or the price the irresponsible pricing that a lot of pharmaceutical companies have been engaging in, including generics, that has to stop. And if it won't stop voluntarily, and there's no sign that I see that the industry has the intestinal fortitude to stop doing this on their own, they'll have to be made to do it through governmental activity, and that's we're going to have to have a reckoning with that pricing. It does exist in the hospital sector too, and I think that as long as we play a revenue-driven top line fee-for-service game, we'll never invest in social determinants. That's set up exactly in the opposite direction.
One of the questions, you were, I think you may have been the principal author of the six dimensions of quality, yeah. And the dimension of equity was ignored a great deal for a very long time, and now it's coming to the forefront. Why do you think we weren't paying attention to it before, and why do you think it's come to the fore now?
And I was the author of that list. Originally got molded by a committee I chaired, but I remember writing it on a flip chart. If I were going to do it again, I think I might put equity first. At that time, the Crossing the Quality Chasm report had been issued, and the public, it was possible to explain to the public in a way that meant something personal to everyone why patient safety was important. Everyone knew somebody that had been injured in healthcare, and so it was possible to mobilize public sentiment for that. Around the issue of effectiveness, we had strong evidence of variability in practice, and so that was very much on people's minds. But I must say, we were very focused on the delivery system. Indeed, the funding of the Crossing the Quality Chasm, the committee that wrote Crossing the Quality Chasm, specifically included focusing on delivery only. It did not include public health. We weren't funded to look at public health. Had we been, or had I been smarter at that time, I think we probably would have had a much stronger sense of the devastating role of inequity in producing health and well-being. We might have listed it much higher. The events since, with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the new surge of interest is just bringing to the fore stuff Michael Marmot was writing about 30 years ago, but it's here now, and equity deserves to be at the top of that list.
Just continuing on this set of questions, much of the financing that we do is now directed at people at the end of life. We, as Children's Hospitals Office, are focused on children. How should we think about that? How might we?
I wish someone would ask me an easy question. So I'm going to put that in. Well, first, of course, the end of life concerns got. There are two things that happened there. One is that we had great research, the Support Project, and Joanne Lynn's work now almost 30 years ago, which showed an anomaly, which was that when you asked patients who were at the end of life, families, and clinicians to describe the care they wanted, it was at home, not connected to ventilators and machines, in the company of loved ones, in a peaceful place. It was not the intensive care unit as the place to die. And yet there was, in that profoundly important research study funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the discrepancy between what actually happened and what Bill said they wanted to happen was profound, was immense. And so we were using intensive care for people that didn't want it, administered by clinicians that didn't want to use it. That might have been fee-for-service at work. That might have been just the underlying dynamics of a funding system, which only makes money when it's doing stuff. And the last thing you want to do is just stand there, which is sometimes the important thing to do. And then, of course, it got politicized in the death panel, stupidity, and all that deception in an irresponsible public debate, public statements. So it became it's an American enterprise to do a lot at the end of life. I think we're unlearning that. I think that now, as we move into the what matters to you era, that's getting better. But kids, always at the end of the line there, you look at our experience, look at the funding of education right now, not just early child education overall. Kids I guess they don't vote. And that has led to an economy, a political economy that does not stress the well-being of children as a fundamental priority. I have to go back to Sir Michael's work, which I find so important, and this arrival at the concept of fairness. It's that in some mysterious or magical way, health in society seems driven by a sense that we're in this together, a sense of mutuality and caring, and a vision of the community we want to be. And that, to me, is at the absolute heart of the matter. How do we want to be? And if we have that conversation, we could have that conversation, I think we would understand. We want to be a place where it's great to grow up. We want to be a place where where dying is dignified. We want to be a place where if you're in trouble, someone gives you a hand. I mean, there's a whole list of characteristics of communities that have to be raised. And I think that's why I wrote Moral Determinants of Health. The other dynamics don't seem to get the traction that I think we need to derive from what I guess would be a vision of the kind of place we want to be.
We're, in addition to being a clinical and research organization, we're also an educational organization, and there's an opportunity for us to start educating the next generation in different ways. Do you have thoughts about that? How might Cincinnati children start to approach this in a way that could make a contribution?
Well, the first thing that occurs to me in asking that question is how much you taught me, Peter, watching you as a leader and a thinker, and how open and inclusive your view of what our mission and activities need to be. I've taken enormous instruction from you and from Uma and from others at Cincinnati. We have to teach that to our younger people. We have to broaden their view of the pursuit of health and well-being as citizens and as professionals. We have to walk the talk. They're gonna learn what we do, not what we say. I think it's very important to move upstream. Now, my impression is that youth want this. I teach at Harvard Medical School every January, and I'm just so impressed at the first and second year medical students I'm encountering they're way ahead of us. They know what this is important. They read the newspapers, and somehow I think the raw material we have to build social conscience and proper balance of investment into the professionals we're starting with a great palette with the people that arrive in our hands. Then we teach them, we unteach it, I guess, in some ways that we've just got to stop and inspect. One thing I do want to say is, look, Cincinnati it's a masterful high-tech repair shop. That is, it does amazing, miraculous things, saving lives of kids every day, improving the well-being of families. Nothing I'm saying implies we should stop that. And I want to be really clear about that balance, that I think we need to continue to teach our young professionals to be the best of therapists, no matter what their disciplines. But broadening the perspective into the social arena is going to be necessary to be able to free up social energies and economic resources to actually help achieve the equity that underlies health.
Let me ask just one last question, and I'll just share that this is from Michael Fisher, who asks, as businesses are beginning to pay more attention to stakeholder capitalism and provide leadership on societal issues, do you think how might we enroll them in focusing more on the moral determinants of health and the importance of investing in children?
It's a controversial area because some people claim that the privatization of these public endeavors of fairness would be a mistake. Somehow hands over power to companies. I don't think that. I think that businesses are made up of people, and that they can own a share of the mutual responsibilities we have. We need to create, of course, legal guidelines that make it more likely for them to do that. But I'm not naive, but I do think we can appeal to our private sector as well, saying what kind of society do you want here, and what's your part in creating it? On the economics, I cannot believe that the injury we are doing to our nation by failing to support kids and elders and workplaces and education and infrastructures in our communities, I cannot believe that that's good for business. Not for a business that has a discount rate that's below 50%. It isn't good for businesses to be an unhealthy society. So maybe there's a self-interest argument there. But yes, Michael, I'd like to make the case. I think the other side of that is we have to create guardrails so that businesses cannot engage in greed as a driver, and least of all should healthcare businesses be able to do that. So there's a regulatory side to this that I don't, if pharma can't control its prices, government's going to have to. I just don't know another way. We can't have it this way right now. It's taking money from people that really need that money.
Don, we've come to the top of the hour. Thank you so much for making time to inspire us today. We have had a lot to think about. We've got even more as a result of your talk. And so just deeply grateful for your willingness to take the time.
Thanks, Peter. You're leaders, and I know you'll continue to lead, and I hope you'll continue to let me be at your side.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for participating.